Part 76. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guangguang Zi. Chapter 751. On December 27, 2019, Xiaodudu was put on the shelves. As of today, December 31, 2020, it has been exactly 1 year and 4 days. The number of words updated in the two books is just about 3 million. It may not be a long time, but the various things I have experienced may be more than what Aguan has experienced in the past 20 years. I remember that when Xiaodudu was put on the shelves, there were only a few hundred collections and 60 subscriptions. At that time, I was very depressed. After all, when I just started the book, I was full of confidence. I quit my job and ran back to write full-time after signing the contract. I thought that I could make a living with 500 subscriptions. It's just 500 subscriptions. I can get it by writing casually. Collect free good books. Follow v.x Book Friends Basecamp to recommend your favorite novels and receive cash red envelopes. As a result, the reality in front of me made Aguan understand the cruelty of this road. But I didn't give up at that time. After all, the first book I wrote in 2013 has only 700 recommendation votes so far. This book is at least better than the previous one. I don't have the habit of writing books without being Unix. Once I start a book, I must finish it. At that time, I thought about writing it quickly and finishing the book with 1 million words in 3 months. From January to February, I was purely a single player. I stared at the collection and recommendation tickets every day. I was happy for a long time as long as I moved, and fantasized that I could still get up. In the end, I slowly became desperate. I didn't even look at the data, but just buried my head in writing frantically. At that time, a reader commented that I should build a book club. I didn't want to build it at that time, because the long-term single-player work had worn out all my passion and I didn't want to communicate with people at all, but I still built a book club in the end. At the beginning, there were only 8 people in the book club. Gradually, more and more people came. By the time the book was finished, the number of people was almost over 1,000. It was with the encouragement of these brothers and sisters that I regained some of my spirits and continued to grit my teeth and use love to generate electricity, pushing the 1 million words to 1.4 million words. Basically, I wrote everything I could write, and only skipped the battle plot. It was already April when I finished writing The Little Commander. At that time, I also won the first leader of the life of the big boss of the Heavenly Gate, which was also a small achievement. However, at that time, the pressure of reality had already reached the point of being on fire. From November when I quit my job to write a book, to April, a full 5 months, I earned 5,000 yuan by writing books. After paying the property, electricity, and phone bills, there was basically nothing left, and I had to rely on borrowing money to get by. By April, I couldn't even borrow money from online loans. Big guys, don't touch this, it's a bottomless pit, and that feeling could directly drive people to death. At that time, I thought, I would take a final gamble, and if I didn't succeed, I would die. To be honest, I already had a gambler's mentality. It was also because of the great pressure of reality that the Book of the Prince was too hasty. The Book of the Little Governor was completed on April 28, and the Prince published the book on May 1. During this period, there was no detailed preparation at all, and the outline of the first 3 volumes was written. Fortunately, with the support of brothers and sisters, this stage was overcome, and the Prince achieved a result that Aguan didn't dare to think of a few months ago. Now he can write with peace of mind without being troubled by reality. However, hasty book opening obviously has side effects. The writing of the Crown Prince was smooth in the early stage, but after the first 3 volumes were written, because there was no time to prepare detailed settings and outlines before the book was opened, the main plot was a bit floating in the later stage, and the arrangement of the heroine was unreasonable. She appeared too early and had too few scenes in the later stage. Because there was no hope at all at that time, I thought that if the book failed again, leaving Chang'an City would be the finale, so most of the heroines showed their faces in Chang'an City, and I didn't think about what the heroines should do in the later stage. In addition, the little governor was supposed to accumulate experience, but in the later stage, a lot of wars and hegemony plots were skipped. At that time, the idea was that I could write this, so the Book of the Crown Prince was also arranged. After all, most historical texts end with wars. As a result, when I wrote here, I found that I had never written about the experience of fighting before, and I didn't know where to start. It would be better to quickly skip the war plot like the little governor. However, the little governor skipped the plot based on the fact that the heroine scenes had all been completed, while the emotional line of the heroine of the Crown Prince had not been completed, and the main plot was difficult to write, so it was frozen on the spot. This is also the reason why the updates have been getting slower and slower since I wrote it. The foundation is not laid well. The higher the building is built, the easier it is to collapse. I have been trying to find the right direction to finish the tale of the prince and not let my brothers and sisters down. The Prince is the second official book of Iguan, and it is also a way to cross the river by feeling the stones to accumulate experience. Now I can only remember these flaws and strive to lay a good foundation for the next book. Tomorrow is 2021. I hope that in the new year, I can continue on this path with my brothers and sisters. I also wish my brothers and sisters a career that takes off on the spot, a healthy body, and a wave of peach blossoms in the new year. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 752. Duke Angguo's Mansion. After the morning court meeting, Zhou Qin returned to the mansion, took off his official robes, and went to the study alone. Sicongji's injuries had not yet healed, but his complexion was much better than the previous few days. He stood opposite the desk with a cane, with a look of worry in his eyes. Recently, I have been searching for Su Buling's whereabouts, but to no avail. The last time Su Buling went to Chenju's house, Pud risked his life to remind him. I thought Su Buling had already retreated, but I didn't expect Su Buling to turn around and kill Pud. This loss is not small. Nkuagong Zhou Qin stood in front of the window, feeding crows, with a very calm expression. Pud is not one of us, but he couldn't let go of Ning-er, so he stayed by Chenju's side for 20 years. If he had come forward earlier, I would have just changed someone and promised Ning-er to him. When he was young, he only cared about love and romance, and his personality was stubborn and inflexible. He didn't know how to care when he was alive, and he showed his true feelings when he died. Who did he do it for? Sicongji shook his head and sighed, and it was hard to comment. Concubine Zhou is Zhou Qin's biological daughter. No matter how evil a person is, he has a family. How could he not have any feelings for her? Pud was just a knight-errant back then, and he was not even worthy of the daughter of the county magistrate, let alone the direct bloodline of the Insect Valley. If Pud had shown his talent for martial arts earlier, a master-level swordsman, would the Insect Valley not want him? This is just like the Sword Saint Zulu wanting to marry into the family. Which force in the world would not want to give up a daughter? It's just a change to replace a daughter into the palace. It doesn't matter if Pud left in a young and impetuous manner, and ran back afterwards. She is still stubborn. Otherwise, Concubine Zhou would not have died in depression. Originally, when the queen died, Concubine Zhou could be established as the queen, and Chenju would become a legitimate son from a collateral line. With his biological mother, it would not be as difficult to control the court as it is now. It was inevitable that Zhou Qin had a problem with Pud because of these things. It was because Pud had guarded Chenju for 20 years that he buried Pud near the concubine's mausoleum. The matter has already passed, and there is no point in talking about it. Sicongji skipped this topic and said, I just went to the second prince's study to check, and someone stepped on the secret mark, but following the traces left, the location is Fuan Palace. The third princess often goes to Chenju's study, and it is possible that she accidentally stepped on it. Apart from that, no outsider has entered the study. If Su Buling does not move, his whereabouts cannot be traced at all. What should we do now? The third princess. Zhou Qin frowned slightly. He knew that Chen Xining went to Chenju's house every day to get power to handle cases, but he did not take it to heart. After careful consideration, Su Buling can't not move. Since he didn't go to Chenju's study, he must have found out the news somewhere else. He stayed in Nanya just to find someone. Since he couldn't find Su Buling's whereabouts, he might as well wait in front of the bait. No matter how he looked, he would end up there. Sikongji nodded gently. This was the best way at the moment. Without saying anything more, he put on his cloak and left the study silently, heading for Yulongling. After getting Qing back from Su Buling, Chen Xining returned to the palace, and the sky gradually darkened. After a few days of recuperation, the slap marks on her chest had disappeared. Chen Xining found something to do and felt a little better. After returning to the bedroom, Chen Xining drove all the maids out and began to think seriously about the next plan at the desk. First, Su Buling provided information that Zhou Qin was from the 100 Insects Valley. Chen Xining didn't believe it at all, but she had studied various cases since she was a child, so she would not forget a piece of information just because she didn't believe it, and she had to find a way to investigate it clearly. Then there was the mystery of the 5 people in Yulongling. According to Su Buling's words, Sikongji's behavior in the prison, etc., it was speculated that whether this matter was related to Zhou Qin or not, it must be related to the 100 Insects Valley. The 100 Insects Valley is a major concern for Nanyu, and it must be investigated clearly. However, how to investigate this matter is obviously a big problem. If Zhou Qin is from the 100 Insects Valley, she will use the power of the government to investigate, but she will alert the enemy before leaving Beijing. The 100 Insects Valley was a behemoth 60 years ago. Even if it was wiped out by Dayu and only a few remnant branches were left, the use of poison and martial arts inheritance was not much weaker. Until now, Sikongji is still the strongest poisoner in the South Ujianghu. It is true that Chen Xining is highly skilled in martial arts, but asking her to fight Sikongji alone is basically like sending herself to death, not to mention that there are more than just Sikongji in the 100 Insects Valley, and it is impossible to investigate without using the power of the government. Using the power of the government may alert the enemy, and it is impossible to investigate without using the power of the government. Chen Xining thought alone for a long time and slowly found that she was in a dead end. After thinking for a long time and not being able to figure it out, Chen Xining had to lie down on the bed, looking at the top of the tent and thinking hard. The bedroom was very quiet, and the 2 little snakes were coiled beside the pillow as usual. Originally, the 2 little snakes were very quiet. As long as they had nothing to do, they would coil there and rest motionlessly, but tonight, it was a little different from the past. The little white snake spit out pink snake tongue and got close to Qing, as if curious about something. Qing was a little tossing and turning, raising his head to look at the window from time to time, and then turning back to rub against the little white snake. The 2 little snakes seemed to be communicating. If he could speak, he would probably say, Xiao Qing, where have you been? Why are you thinking about the outside world? Xiaobai, I met a very good person who has delicious food, which is better than anything I have eaten in my life. There are also 2 little sparrows and insects that look delicious, but unfortunately one of them dares not eat it, and the other one doesn't let me eat it. It tastes better than the reward from the master. It tastes 100 times better. The rainy night was silent. Chen Xining was thinking about all kinds of troubles. As she was thinking, she felt sleepy and closed her eyes. When she was half asleep and half awake, she suddenly heard a rustling sound. She woke up and looked over in confusion. On the carpet of the bedroom, two little snakes were quietly crawling towards the small door of the window. Ah Ching was in front and the white snake was behind. They didn't know where they were going. Chen Si Ning was puzzled and looked at them. Ah Ching, Ah Bai, what are you doing? The little white snake was very obedient. Seeing that the master had discovered it, it ran back obediently, coiled beside the pillow, closed its eyes and continued to sleep. Ah Ching paused for a moment, hesitated, and returned to the bed, close to the little white snake, a little wilted. Chen Si Ning blinked her eyes, and after watching for a long time, she thought that the two little snakes had been holding back for a long time and wanted to go out to relax, so she smiled and said, "It's raining. When the rain stops, I'll take you out to bask in the sun." The two little snakes were very well behaved and lay quietly beside them. Chen Si Ning was relieved, and gently covered the two little pets with a thin blanket, and fell into a dream peacefully. Time passed slowly, and it was unknown how long it had passed. The rain was a little lighter, and the sky in the east gradually brightened. The maid walked outside the palace with toiletries, and some voices came from outside the door. Chen Si Ning woke up from her sleep, rubbed her eyes slightly sleepily, and tilted her head to look next to the pillow. Aching! Beside the pillow, there were only two little snakes that would wait for her to get up every day. Only the little white snake was still there, and it was also looking around in confusion, spitting out its snake tongue, looking for the whereabouts of its little friend. Chen Si Ning lost all sleepiness and immediately became anxious. She stood up and searched for a long time on the bed and turned the bedroom over and over, but found nothing. Why is it gone? Chen Si Ning was anxious and confused. She obviously didn't understand why Ah Ching, who had been obedient since childhood, suddenly ran away from home. After thinking about it for a while, all the things that were wrong from yesterday to today came to her mind. Chen Si Ning was slightly shocked and suddenly understood something. This little thief is too much. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 753. In the early morning, between the mountains bordering Qinzhou and Yangzhou, Su Buling, carrying a package on his shoulder and holding a straight knife, opened a path on the bushy mountain. The autumn rain that had lasted for several days stopped, and white fog lingered between the thousands of mountains. The morning sun shone in the sky, and the whole world looked like a carefully drawn painting. Behind Su Buling, Zhongli Jiju held the little green snake he had just obtained in his hands, with a glow in his eyes, just like an ordinary warrior who had obtained a peerless secret book. He couldn't bear to look away, and was afraid that the late autumn weather would freeze the little green snake, so he wrapped the little green snake with a handkerchief. Seeing this scene, the little sparrow who had accompanied Zhongli Jiju for many years was so angry that he went on strike and even refused to do the investigation. He shrank in Zhongli Chuchu's clothes and pretended to be sick. Su Buling, who was aggrieved, couldn't stand it. Su Buling still liked the little sparrow more. He brought the little green snake back and didn't send it away. The little sparrow obviously took his responsibility and didn't get close to him. At this time, he looked back. Jiju, that girl likes the snake very much. It's a bit unethical to kidnap it like this. The little green snake also missed Chen Si Ning. It sneaked over at night just to get some food, but it didn't expect the feeding machine in front of it to take it away directly. At this time, he was a little depressed and looked back at the road he had walked from time to time. Zhongli Jiju could understand the little green snake's thoughts, knowing that the little green snake missed its old master and would not stay with her for long. Animals are simpler than humans, and even if they were forcibly abducted, they would not live long if they were unhappy. And if someone kidnapped the little sparrow she had raised since childhood, she would definitely be anxious. Zhongli Jiju held the green snake with some reluctance, and sighed faintly. I will take it with me for a few days to satisfy my craving, and then return it to the girl when we return from Yulong Ridge. The girl doesn't know how to raise it at all, and it's a complete waste to keep it with her. It's a pity that she has already raised it since childhood. If it weren't for Xiaoqing who couldn't let it go, I wouldn't give it back to her. The little sparrow chirped twice, and although I couldn't understand it, it should be saying, if you dare to keep it, I won't recognize you. Yulongling is only 100 miles away from Yangzhou City, but the terrain of Nanyu is very different from the flat land of Chu. Yulongling is located between mountains, and even hunters rarely go there. There is no road at all. It takes at least 7 or 8 days to go back and forth. Su Buling shook his head and smiled. He knew that he must have been scolded by Chen Xining. He had already left Yangzhou City. It would be more troublesome to let the green snake go and get lost at this time. He could only wait until he got back. Zhongli Chuchu walked between the two of them. It was obvious that she didn't sleep well last night. She held a small branch in her hand and swept it aimlessly on the road opened by Su Buling. Hearing the master's words, she whispered. If Su Buling didn't ask, you wouldn't return it? You've always been envious of what others have. If Ning Yuhi is the top 8, you'll grab the top 8. If Ning Yuhi has a man, you'll grab the man. You say it's over, but your body is very honest. After these days of asking for more, Zhongli Jiju has become thick-skinned. Not only is she not shy, but she also said earnestly. That's natural. You have to fight for happiness yourself. There's no such thing as pie in the sky. Chuchu, you have to learn from your master. Otherwise, in the future, when the children are running all over the place, you'll still be alone. Master. Zhongli Chuchu couldn't stand it anymore. She gritted her teeth and ran to the front. Su Buling was very happy about this. Seeing Chuchu approaching, he took the opportunity to ask with concern. Didn't you sleep well last night? Let me carry you, and take a rest. There was a wolf in front and a tiger behind. Zhongli Chuchu had nowhere to hide, so she could only keep her head down and not answer. But she couldn't escape this way. Before she could answer, her body became lighter and was carried on Su Buling's back. You. Zhongli Chuchu really regretted following him at this time. She hit Su Buling on the shoulder with her hand, but there was nothing she could do. Liujiang River, Luoshui Mountain. After a few days of heavy rain, the river level rose a lot, and the ferry carrying people docked at the pier. Among the people crossing the river, the third princess Chen Xining, wearing a veil hat and dressed like a woman of the rivers and lakes, walked down the steps in a low-key manner, looked around on the pier, and walked into a small shop near the pier. As the third princess of Nanyu, Chen Xining was not allowed to venture into the world or investigate cases by either the royal family or the court. She had sneaked out several times before, and every time she went back, she would be confined by Chenju for a month. Last time, he issued an ultimatum that if she dared to run around alone again, she would be sent directly to Dayo for marriage. In Dayo's eyes, Nanyu was just a small border country, and the queen of Dayo was occupied by the 5 major families. Even if she was a princess of Nanyu, she would be a concubine at most if she was sent to Chang'an. Chen Xining had heard too much about the tragic stories of Kui Zioan and Xiao Xiang the stunning beauties, who died alone in the deep palace since she was a child. She must be afraid of marrying to a foreign country thousands of miles away. And judging from the current situation in Dayo, she might be even more miserable than the queens like Kui Zioan if she married there. Perhaps she would become the concubine of Songling as soon as she entered the palace, and before Songling grew up, she would become the forbidden delicacy of the Su family. Not to mention enjoying a peaceful life, she could not even keep her reputation in the future. Therefore, Chen Xining has been staying in the palace obediently in recent months, and has not caused any more headaches for the royal family. But this time, she really couldn't bear it anymore. The clues of the 100 Insects Valley were in front of her, but she couldn't use the power of the government to investigate. What's more, her beloved pet was also abducted by the evil people. The people in the world made a promise and it was difficult to follow up. They agreed to exchange Ah Cheng's safety for information. She gave the information and then used unknown means to abduct Ah Cheng. Is this blatant bullying of an honest person? The more I think about it, the angrier I get. The more I think about it when I step back, the more I lose. Not to mention marrying to Chang'an, even if she was kidnapped by barbarians from the northwest, she would still have to go to that shameless man to ask for an explanation. Because of this matter, Chen Xining didn't even fall asleep yesterday, and she hasn't eaten anything until now. It wasn't until she crossed the river away from the capital that she felt a little calmer. The small shop on the pier is a mom and pop shop, and the business is good. People who come and go will basically have a casual meal here. Although there is a bit of a smell that makes Chen Xining uncomfortable, it is not the first time to go out and walk around, and she is not too particular. Chen Xining sat down at the small table, and the landlady came over enthusiastically and looked up and down. "Girl, what do you want to eat? Just pick up whatever you're good at. I have to set off on my journey soon." Chen Xining replied with a smile, took off the hat and put it on the small table, took a casual look at it, and then asked. "By the way, Auntie, was there a man passing by here from yesterday to today? He was dressed like a Jianghu man, half a head taller than me, and he was carrying a teal-colored straight knife. He should be accompanied by a companion. Well, he has the same eyes. I'm similar, but more heroic than me." Chen Xining knew that Su Buling would go to Yulongling. The shortest way to cross the river was to go to Yulongling. At this time, she casually inquired to see how far away she was. However, Su Buling must have dressed up in disguise when traveling around the world. It's hard to describe his appearance. The lady boss listened to Chen Xining's description for a long time, thought about it for a moment, nodded and smiled. Yesterday afternoon, a man passed by with two girls. He was dressed like a mountain man and had a big beard. He was not as heroic as the girls. Really? Chen Xining felt a little happy in her heart. She was already quite talkative, so she naturally started asking questions. He has two girls with him. What kind of girls? It was still early, and there were not many customers in the shop. After the proprietress and the chef greeted her, she sat down directly at the table and said as if she was a regular visitor. They all seem to be wandering around, their faces are covered, but their figures are really scary. One of them is younger, he looks about the same age as the girl, he is taller than the girl, and his breasts are like those of a wet nurse in a wealthy family. Looking at the other one is older, the little girl calls him master. His figure is even more enviable. He is so mature that he looks like a gourd from a distance. Chen Xining grew up among women, so she was no stranger to the conversations between these women. She even lowered her head and looked. Really? But it's not surprising, that man is quite handsome. What is the relationship between those two women and that man? Judging by their age, they should be the little girl's husband-in-law. The landlady laughed and said slightly weirdly, "It's hard to tell." Both girls seemed to be confused with the man. I saw it secretly, and the man was obviously getting closer to the older one. But he secretly touched the little girl's leg behind his back. It seemed that this was not the first time that the little girl had suffered a loss. She just glared at the man and swallowed her anger. Chen Xining was stunned. Hearing this description, it didn't sound like Su Xingxian. How could such a noble knight do such a thing? However, Chen Xining then thought about it. He even did such dirty things as abducting Ah Cheng. Maybe he was really a hypocrite with a human face and a beastly heart. Thinking of this, Chen Xining's eyes turned slightly cold and she snorted lightly. The landlady couldn't figure out the relationship between Chen Xining and the man, so she yelled again, "Ha. Maybe I misjudged it?" The man was really interesting, he could talk and knew the goods. When they walked to the door of the shop, neither girl wanted to come in. It was the man who dragged him in. Chen Xining nodded slightly. There was a strange smell in the shop. A clean-minded woman would definitely not be happy to come in. She came in and sat down just to inquire about the news. After a few inquiries, the landlady didn't know much, so Chen Xining casually chatted about something else. After about half a quarter of an hour, the proprietress came over enthusiastically with a tray and placed the chopsticks and big bowl on the table. Chen Xining was so angry yesterday that she couldn't eat. She was really a little hungry. She picked up her chopsticks and wanted to make do with the meal, but she sniffed. His face turned green. "Smells so bad." The landlady looked a little embarrassed and said with a smile, "It doesn't smell very good, but it tastes good. They are all fished from the river and are clean." As a princess of the royal family, Chen Xining had not been well bred since she was a child. Looking at the enthusiastic landlady, she felt embarrassed to dislike her face to face. At that moment, she could only pick up the chopsticks and pick up a black snail. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 754. Qinzhou Yulongling is located between mountains. There were originally residents. However, a large area of miasma suddenly appeared near Yulongling 60 years ago. It gathered in the mountains all year round. The people gradually moved away and it slowly became a deserted place with few people. Only brave hunters and herbal farmers occasionally came here. In late autumn, the ancient trees around Yulongling blocked the sky and the sun, and the mist was filled below. Even on sunny days, visibility was very low. In the depths of the dense forest, Sikongji used a vine cane to bypass the traps and came to a stone cave below Yulongling. The stone cave seemed to be naturally formed, and there were many poisonous scorpions wandering inside. Even if ordinary people saw it, they would definitely not dare to set foot. Sikongji used the cane to sweep away the scorpions blocking the way and tapped the stone wall twice. In a moment, a huge stone leaning against the corner of the stone cave slowly moved away, revealing a passage. Deep in the deep passage, the lights were as bright as day. An underground palace was at the end of the field of vision. People in black robes were walking in it. The sounds of pounding and grinding medicine were endless. There were also various poisonous creatures wandering in it. There was a deep pit on the side, in which no less than 10,000 poisonous snakes were raised. There were also many coolies with shackles, who were forced to do various heavy work like zombies. In Qinzhou, it is said that 1,000 years ago, an emperor's tomb was built here. The Nanya court also searched for it several times, but unfortunately it was never found. Until Jiazi years ago, the 100 Insects Valley, which had been passed down for hundreds of years, was burned down by Dayu. The remaining dozen core disciples fled into the mountains and accidentally discovered this place, and used it as a refuge. At that time, the 100 Insects Valley was the most underestimated in history. Sikongji and Zhou Qin were also born in this tomb at that time. At that time, there were only a dozen elders around them. They were hidden deep underground and never saw the sun before the age of 3, they didn't even know that there was daytime in the world. Fortunately, after nearly 60 years of recuperation, the 100 Insects Valley has finally made some progress. The original imperial mausoleum has been slowly transformed into its current size, and the dozen disciples at that time have also grown to nearly 1,000 people, most of whom are hiding in various places in South Vietnam. However, this is still far from the tens of thousands of disciples in the heyday of the 100 Insects Valley. You must know that the 100 Insects Valley was the state religion of the Bayou countries back then, and it could even compete with the Central Plains in the martial arts world. What about Wudane, Longhu, Cao family, and Lu family? When they came to the Bioland, who dared not give face to the 100 Insects Valley? Sikongji had heard about the past glory from his father's mouth, but he had never seen it with his own eyes. However, the development of the 100 Insects Valley to its current appearance in the hands of him and Zhou Qin was already a great sense of accomplishment. Moreover, the tragedy before the Jiazi year also reminded the elders of the 100 Insects Valley that no matter how powerful the Jianghu is, it is not greater than the imperial power. It is unrealistic to rely on poison to prosper forever. The only family that can last for 1,000 years is the aristocratic family. It was from that time that the 100 Insects Valley changed its direction and stopped mixing in the Jianghu. Shang Guanqin He, the direct descendant of the master of the 100 Insects Valley, was secretly taken away when he was 3 or 4 years old. He became the youngest son of a family surnamed Zhou. He used the pseudonym Zhou Qin to study and learn to read and take the imperial examination. He became a small county magistrate in a remote place and slowly accumulated his resume. After sending concubine Zhou to the palace, the 100 Insects Valley also managed various relationships and eliminated political enemies. It took more than 20 years to gradually control the court of Nanyu. Next, as long as Chenju succeeded to the throne, the 100 Insects Valley could change its identity and reappear in another form, and then officially start playing the chess of the world. But if you want to play chess, you must first have chess pieces. Even if the 100 Insects Valley controls the entire South Vietnam, it is nothing but a weakling in front of the world. In order to prevent being killed by Dayo as soon as it appears, it has to control a stronger chess piece. At this time, the Su family usurped the country and occupied Guangzhou. Dayo was divided into two, and Su Buling's woman happened to be from South Vietnam. Then things are simple. As long as Su Buling is brought over and controlled, he can peacefully encroach on the surrounding areas. Su Buling doesn't need to do anything, as long as he doesn't order the use of troops against South Vietnam. As long as South Vietnam is given a few more years to mobilize troops, relying on the various poison techniques of the 100 Insects Valley, not to mention unifying the world, occupying the South, and forming a four-nation tripod with Dongyu, Zhou, and Baiki, there is still no problem. Maybe it is stronger than Dongyu, composed of the four kings in the East. It's just that the idea is very beautiful, but it is very troublesome to actually operate it. Su Buling is too cunning. Sikongji was still troubled by this matter. If he could not poison Su Buling, then the 100 Insects Valley would have no way to deal with Su Buling. Now he could only hope that Su Buling would take the initiative to attack, find the whereabouts of the 5 hostages, and fall into the trap. Sikongji leaned on his rattan stick, walked through the deep tomb passage, and came to the intricate huge underground cave. Guling, the third elder of the 100 Insects Valley, walked over quickly and asked, "Second brother, why are you back? Have you finished the matter in the capital?" Sikongji took off his cloak, handed it to his disciple, and shook his head. "I came back to wait for the rabbit. Where are the 5 people I caught now? There are too many poisonous substances in the underground cave, and it never sees the sun all year round. Living in it will inevitably be affected." The third elder Guling is also like Sikongji, with sparse hair and wrinkled face, looking very old. He raised his hand and pointed at several wooden cages on the stone wall in the distance. "They are locked up there, but they are all ordinary people with no foundation. They couldn't stand the cold in the cave and fell ill. I treated them in case they would be useful in the future, but the old woman is too old and she probably won't live for a few more days." Sikongji raised his hand slightly. "It doesn't matter if she lives or dies, as long as she is alive. How is the crazy King Gu? South Vietnam's military strength is inferior to that of Northern Chi and Dayo. They have been suppressed by Dayo for 60 years. It is difficult to fight against Dayo's army head-on. They can only find ways to resort to evil ways, and the Mad King can make the army blow up camps and kill each other. Gu is naturally the best choice. It's just that Mad King Gu has such a great reputation. It was because of this thing that Baichong Valley suffered a disaster. If it was just a poison like locking dragon Gu that could be used to deal with martial arts masters, Emperor Xiaozong of Dayo would not be interested in digging 3 holes in the ground. Chi, wipe out a South Vietnamese Jianghu force. Back then, 100 Insect Valley was burned to the ground, and the disciples were almost killed. Although the remaining disciples rescued many sect treasures, the Mad King Gu could not be saved, and even the method of raising it was lost. Sicongji spent most of his life trying to find ways to restore Mad King Gu, but unfortunately the results were never satisfactory. Gu Ling also had a somewhat sad look on his face and took Sicongji to a dungeon behind the underground palace. The dungeon has hundreds of cells, each containing a prisoner and even a few war horses. At this time, most of the people captured secretly had dull eyes, and the rest were banging their heads against the wall, laughing, etc. They were definitely crazy, but they were obviously not lethal. The crazy King Gu I raised the year before last is considered to be the best in appearance. However, a few of the people who were infected by the poison died violently due to self-mutilation. Most of them were crazy but not vicious. The few who went around killing people were very quick. It is dead and difficult to spread. According to the book, the Mad King's poison cannot kill people, and the madness of those infected can last for several days until exhaustion. What we have done now is too far from our ancestors. Well, Sicongji had nothing to do about it. It would take a year or 2 to raise Gu. Without any examples to refer to, it was basically like endless trial and error. The gods never knew when they would get it right. He thought for a while. It can drive people crazy, and it can also paralyze military formations. Let the disciples seize the time to raise poison to collect venom. When fighting, throwing a trebuchet on the city wall can always help break the city and repel the enemy. Gu Ling thought for a while, the trebuchet, I have never used it like this. It costs a lot, and I don't know how effective it is. With the support of South Vietnam's national strength, you don't have to worry about the cost, just go ahead and do it. Good. Thank you, no slap in the face boss, for the 30,000 reward. Thank you, this book is really good, kick boss, for the great reward. Thank you Mo hey for the 10,000 reward. Today is the birthday of the Queen Mother and Xiaoqi. On the first day of 2021, please give me some monthly votes. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 755. Su Buling traveled through the deserted mountains for 2 days without any landmarks or roads. He could only determine his current location by measuring distance with his feet, but the error was too large. According to previous estimates, we should have reached the vicinity of Yulong Ridge, but as far as the eye could see were barren mountains and wild ridges, and there was no location in this world. Apart from being able to determine the correct direction from the rising and setting of the sun, it was completely unclear where we had gone. It is really difficult to find the home base of 100 Insect Valley in a place like this. Zhongli Chu lay on Su Buring's back and was forced to carry it for 2 days. Now he was used to it. He rested his chin on Su Buring's shoulder and looked around. This area is even more remote than Phi Shui Ridge. No one has lived in it for decades. There isn't even a map. How can we find it? Su Buling hugged Chu Chu's buttocks, pushed them up slightly, placed the 2 large soft cushions in a more comfortable position, and turned his head to look at the silly wife. Jeju, do you have any idea? Zhongli Jeju is the best at tracking and concealing his whereabouts. He was walking in front, stroking the little green snake, and said confidently. As long as the 100 Insect Valley hides here, it will inevitably pass through the mountains and forests. As long as you move around, you will leave traces, and it is impossible to cover them all. Moreover, Traps and deceptions will be arranged around the hiding place to avoid being accidentally discovered. Keep walking forward, and when you encounter something artificially arranged, it will be easy to find it by following the clues. Su Buling nodded. Although his sixth senses were sharp, his ability to track people across thousands of miles was definitely not as good as Jeju, who specialized in this. At the moment, he was just following Jeju and paying attention to the surrounding movements. Zhongli Chuchu is very tall, and her body is not as light as a swallow. She is quite weighty. After lying on Su Buletinling's back for a while, fearing that Su Buletinling would lose too much strength, he twisted his body and got off the ground to follow. The little sparrow was sleeping on Chu Chu's lapel, but Chu Chu refused to let Su Buring carry it on her back, so naturally she couldn't sleep well. She reluctantly flew up and landed on Su Buring's shoulder again, continuing to glare. An unpleasant little green snake. The three of them were walking in the forest like this. When they reached a mountain stream, Zhongli Jeju finally found some clues. There were several stones in the clear stream, at different distances, and the river mud under the stones was slightly dented. It is not formed by the erosion of streams. Someone has stepped on these stones, more than once. Although I don't know the distance, I am definitely on the right track. Zhongli Jeju said something and raised his hand gently, asking Su Buling to cheer up and pay attention to the surroundings. Then he came to the opposite side of the creek and carefully observed the growth of weeds on the ground to judge the direction of pedestrians. Now that the whereabouts have been found, it means that there are probably hidden whistles around. Su Buring and Zhongli Jeju both lowered their stature slightly and followed Jeju silently to avoid being detected in advance by the hidden whistles. Even the little sparrow, after getting a little more serious, he stood on Su Buling's shoulders and looked around. As we go deeper into the mountains, the light gets darker and darker. The dense bushes and weeds make it impossible to see the situation in the distance. The surrounding area is also a bit quiet and depressing, not even the chirping of birds. Su Buling paid full attention to the surrounding movements. He didn't notice anything wrong with this area at first, but he didn't expect that after walking less than half a mile, he saw the most bizarre scene he had ever encountered in his life. He saw a bush being pushed aside. The front suddenly opened up, and a big tree that covered the sky and the sun appeared in front of us. The crown of the tree was so big that it covered the entire sky. It was full of peach blossoms. The petals were like ocean waves when the breeze blew, and it was so beautiful that it was breathtaking. Su Buling was stunned for a moment, and was about to ask Jeju and Chuchu to come over and take a look. Suddenly, he found that the little sparrow that had been standing on his shoulders fell to the ground, and then began to grow slowly, with two small claws. She turned into slender legs, her wings turned into arms as white as jade, her long black hair fell down from her head, and she transformed into a smooth little beauty. Why has Yi really changed? Su Buletinling's eyes were a little dazed, and he subconsciously sensed something was wrong. It was this momentary psychological fluctuation that awakened the warrior's instinct. Su Buling realized something was wrong, raised his hand and slapped himself on the forehead. The intense pain made him recover from his daze and half-dream. As his consciousness awakened, Su Buling felt as if he had been frightened awake in a dream. Everything in front of him instantly returned to normal. The place he was in was still deep in the mountains and old forests, and the little sparrow was anxiously fluttering its wings next to him, chirping. The ground was anxious and chaotic. He shouted, but Jeju and Chuchu disappeared. What happened? Su Buletinling's expression suddenly changed and he quickly looked back. Fortunately, he woke up quickly enough and was not separated from Jeju and the others. At this time, Jeju was obviously caught in the attack and walked towards the top of the mountain. She was still waving behind her. It seemed that she had discovered Aunt Gui's whereabouts and was calling him and Chu-Chu to come over. Chu-Chu's situation was much worse. She didn't know what ghost she saw. She was so scared that she hugged her head and huddled under the roots of the tree, trembling all over. Su Buling secretly breathed a sigh of relief, but his thoughts were obviously a little sluggish. He felt like he had eaten poisonous mushrooms. His surroundings were switching back and forth between normal and bizarre. It was obvious that he had been poisoned by a hallucinogenic poison. Su Buling twisted his arm hard to prevent him from losing consciousness, and at the same time he quickly ran to Jeju's side. Zhongli Jeju's eyes were slightly distracted, and he obviously didn't realize that he had been drugged by hallucinogenic drugs. He was still walking up the mountain. After being pulled back by Su Buling, he looked back doubtfully and smiled naively. "Ms. Gong, Aunt Gui has been found. It's okay. Look, call Aunt Gui quickly." Su Buling felt dizzy, like being drunk, his thoughts were wildly wandering, even the distance was far and near. He bit his lip to force himself to stay awake, and then shook Jeju's shoulder vigorously. "Jeju! Jeju! Wake up!" The violent shaking and shouting, coupled with Zhongli Jeju's own alertness, made her quickly regain some of her thoughts. The moment her mind cleared, Zhongli Jeju reacted and knew that something was wrong. Without saying a word, she quickly took the medicine bottle from the leg ring and smeared the pungent medicine under the tip of her nose. After taking a deep breath, her beautiful face was slightly distorted by the smell. Su Buling woke up Zhongli Jeju, but he couldn't bear it anymore, and his thoughts began to be dazed again. Fortunately, Zhongli Jeju's thoughts recovered by half, and she quickly smeared the pungent medicine in the medicine bottle under the tip of Su Buling's nose. The indescribable pungent smell rushed straight to the top of his head. Even with Su Buling's strong willpower, tears almost fell. It felt like eating a big mouthful of mustard raw, and his scalp actually felt a stinging pain like a needle. However, the strong stimulation also made Su Buling's mind instantly regain clarity. He pulled Jeju to Chuchu and asked anxiously, "What the hell is this?" Zhongli Jeju had tears in her eyes, and was obviously a little dizzy from the pungent smell. She gritted her teeth and said, "It's a special incense that can make people hallucinate. It's sprinkled on the wildflowers in the mountains. The smell is hidden by the fragrance of flowers. Even I didn't notice it. What a clever trick. If you don't wake up, we can be trapped here. This thing is not easy to solve without knowing the formula. Find a place to hide first." Su Buling felt that this incense seemed to only cause hallucinations, and his actions were not affected. He felt a little relieved, and quickly came to Chuchu, picked her up, and ran as fast as he could along the route he had come, heading for the hiding place he had found on the road. Zhongli Chuchu obviously saw something horrible. After being hugged by Su Buling, she hugged Su Buling's neck like crazy and said in horror, "Mr. Su, Mr. Su." Although Su Buling had hallucinations just now, he didn't think it was that scary. He was a little confused. "Jeju, why did Chuchu react so strongly? Don't you apply some medicine to her?" Zhongli Jeju followed him, enduring the pungent smell. Incense is not poisonous. Although it causes hallucinations, the appearance is determined by the heart. What is in the heart is what you see. Happy people are happier, sad people are sadder, and scared people are more scared. I have been thinking about Aunt Gui, and just now I saw that Aunt Gui was safe and sound. Chuchu probably saw something horrible, and using drugs to stimulate her will only have a counterproductive effect. With you in front of her, she has something to rely on, and she will be fine later. After hearing this explanation, Su Buling understood a little bit. It was nothing more than infinitely magnifying emotions, which was no different from modern hallucinogenic drugs. But the little sparrow he just saw turned into a beautiful woman, naked. Su Buling's expression froze. Zhongli Jeju followed quickly, and after gradually leaving that area, she relaxed a little. She was also a little curious at this time, and asked, "Husband, what did you see just now? You woke up so quickly, how did you realize that something was wrong?" Su Buling coughed lightly and said seriously, I didn't see anything. I am good at martial arts, so it's normal for me to wake up quickly. Oh, really? Zhongli Jiju's eyes were a little suspicious, but the current situation was uncertain, so she didn't want to get to the bottom of it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 756. Earlier. Zhongli Chuchu followed Su Buling and his master, moving deeper into the valley. When they reached the place where there were traces of the enemy, in order to prevent being discovered by the sentries, the three of them did not speak, but moved forward lightly. There was not even a sound in their ears, and the atmosphere was quiet and a little depressing. Zhongli Chuchu's martial arts skills were not very high, and his experience in the martial arts world was far less than that of his master. He could not help behind. With two backers walking in front to protect him, he did not feel nervous, but just looked serious and scanned the surrounding movements. They walked through the dense bushes for an unknown period of time, and the sky gradually darkened. Zhongli Chuchu felt a little sleepy for some reason. As he walked, the road under his feet turned into a grassland. There were more men and women wearing animal skins and linen clothes around him, and some cattle and sheep were tied to wooden fences in the distance. Zhongli Chuchu was a little confused, as if he was dreaming. He did not remember how he came here, but just looked at the familiar but very unfamiliar scene around him blankly. But before she could see the figures around her clearly, a woman in a coarse cloth dress appeared beside her, took her hand, walked towards the tent, and said a few words. The accent was very obscure, Zhongli Chuchu could no longer understand, but she understood the meaning. It was getting dark, go back to the tent. Zhongli Chuchu looked at the woman who was holding her, and found that her hand had become a black and dirty little hand, with the sleeves also grey and linen, so thin that it looked like a dry twig. This is... Zhongli Chuchu stared at the back in front of her, trying to see the face that she had tried to recall many times. But no matter how fast she walked, Zhongli Chuchu could only see a back, because the only thing she remembered in her childhood was this back. Soon she returned to the small tent. Zhongli Chuchu didn't know how she got in, but when she looked up again, the woman had already opened the curtain and disappeared at the door. The tent was very small, with thatch and broken bedding that had been used for who knows how many years on the ground, and a few small earthy yellow bowls next to it. The whole world seemed to be filled with bright colors, just the grass on the ground and her eyes. Zhongli Chuchu huddled on the thatch, hugged her knees, and stared at the light outside the tent. She felt uneasy and felt that something terrible was going to happen, but she couldn't remember what it was. Soon, the sky darkened rapidly in front of her eyes, and the uneasiness in her heart became stronger and stronger. Zhongli Chuchu hugged her knees tightly and shrank back, her eyes becoming more and more terrified. Boom, boom, boom. The earth was shaking. The water bowl next to her was shaking, and the sound of horse hooves and shrill shouts were heard outside. Zhongli Chuchu's face was pale, and the fear from the bottom of her heart that she would never be able to calm down in her life broke out in an instant. Mother! Zhongli Chuchu shouted in a trembling voice, and wanted to get up and run out to find the woman, but found that her legs were out of control and she couldn't stand up at all. Blood and fire, smoke and wailing filled the whole world, and the grey tent was sprinkled with splattered blood, and shadows of sharp teeth and claws swayed rapidly around. The shouts and footsteps became more and more frequent. Soon, she saw a woman in a linen skirt, who fell at the door. She was covered in blood and reached in with scars. She wanted to pull her, but fell to the ground halfway and could not move. Ah, mother! Zhongli Chuchu looked at all this in fear. She wanted to escape but couldn't stand up. She could only hold her head tightly, looking at the gap in the tent curtain, looking at the bloody hand, and cried miserably. Tap tap tap. The footsteps were getting closer and closer. Zhongli Chuchu desperately kicked the thatch on the ground with her feet. Tears and despair filled her eyes, and she wanted to escape from here madly, but she couldn't. Soon the curtain was pulled open. Zhongli Chuchu screamed in fear, picked up the small bowl at hand and wanted to throw it over, but when she saw the figure coming in, she froze for a moment. Outside the door curtain, a man in white, holding a blood-stained sword in his hand, ran in from outside, his eyes anxious and concerned. His tall body and the sharp blade in his hand seemed to be able to block all the fear and despair in the world. Choo-choo. Mr. Su. Zhongli Choo-choo stretched out her hand as if she was grabbing the last straw to save her life, trying to grab the man in front of her. The man in white walked quickly to her, squatted down and hugged her. The warm embrace was very real, more real than being pulled by the woman just now. She was carried out of the tent, but the outside turned into an endless desert, without an enemy and a trace of blood. Zhongli Chuchu hugged the man's neck tightly, saying something incoherently, but she didn't know what she wanted to say. Tears filled her cheeks, and she burst into tears, venting her inner fear and relief. Woo-woo. Chuchu, it's okay, I'm here. The sky darkened, and under the small stone cliff between the mountains, Su Buling sat in the depression of the stone wall, hugged Chuchu tightly, and comforted her softly. Zhongli Chuchu was the weakest and the least cautious. She was obviously trapped in the drug effect of the xiang and couldn't extricate herself. Her eyes were full of tears. She hugged Su Buling and sobbed, and her tears wet her clothes. The little sparrow was on the branch to send out, and Zhongli Chuchu used a branch to slightly cover her tracks, and also sat in front of her and put the little green snake into the wooden box. The confused incense was obviously prepared by the experts of the Insect Valley. The potency of the medicine was extraordinary. No matter how strong Su Buling's physique was, it was a bit difficult for him to recover quickly. He could only use the pungent smell to force himself to refresh himself. But the smell was too strong. After a long time, he instinctively began to hold his breath, and then he began to lose his concentration. Reading benefits. Follow the public account Book Friends Basecamp and win cash/points for reading books every day. Su Buling is already invincible in the world. He has no lack of security in his subconscious mind, and there is nothing to be afraid of. Even if he loses his concentration, the hallucinations that appear are not terrible. He either sees Juju playing with his tail next to him or Chuchu undressing in his arms. Occasionally, the master and apprentice come together, which makes the fire in his heart stir. Fortunately, the pungent medicine was applied under his nose. Breathing is instinctive. When he loses his concentration, he will naturally breathe. Once he breathes, he will wake up, and he didn't do anything out of the ordinary. Zhongli Chuchu really couldn't stand the pungent smell of the drug. With Su Buling protecting her, she didn't force herself to suffer. She just closed her eyes and concentrated, waiting for the drug to wear off. Unfortunately, it didn't last long. Zhongli Chuchu began to hallucinate. She began to move closer to Su Buling, unbuttoned the cloth buttons on her clothes, and untied Chuchu's belt. Zhongli Chuchu was confused, just like in a short film of excessive drinking. She recognized who the two people in front of her were, but she couldn't think independently and just reacted instinctively. After the fear of childhood was suppressed, Zhongli Chuchu fell into the tangle of the person she liked being snatched away by the person closest to her. At this time, she hugged Su Buling and put her face on Su Buling's chest. Seeing the hand extended by the master, she was obviously a little resistant and wanted to push the master away. But she couldn't bear to raise her hand, so she could only murmur vaguely. "Master, how could you do this? You know I like him, you like me the most, how could you do this?" Zhongli Chuchu heard the words, came back to her senses a little, withdrew her hand, and comforted softly. "Chuchu, wake up." Su Buling unconsciously hugged him left and right, and the master and apprentice were not very honest, both rubbing against him. If it was normal, it would be fine, and she would definitely bear it honestly, but now she had to pay attention to the movement outside, so she could only shake her silly wife. Juju, wake up first, why are you taking off your clothes? Zhongli Juju was at a loss, looked down, and found that she had exposed all the white balls. She knew that she couldn't bear it with willpower alone, so she could only take out the small porcelain bottle, wipe it on her nose, and put some on Chu Chu. Ugh! Zhongli Chu Chu leaned in Su Buling's arms, imagining the sweet scene of the two of them sitting in the sea of flowers, when an indescribable pungent smell rushed straight to her head, shattering the world in front of her. With such a stimulation, Zhongli Chu Chu naturally woke up, her eyebrows knitted tightly together, her body tensed, and her fingers almost scratched Su Buling's neck. After holding it in for a long time, she finally caught her breath. It smells so bad, what's wrong with this? Zhongli Chu Chu was like being suddenly awakened from a dream, staring blankly at Su Buling and the master who was putting clothes together in front of her. After a while, the messy memories just now flooded into her mind, making her realize that she had been poisoned. Zhongli Chu Chu realized that something was wrong, and hurriedly took another deep breath, but was almost knocked unconscious by the pungent smell. Su Buling looked at Chu Chu's silly appearance and laughed softly twice. Just taking a breath, he was also choked enough, so he quickly held his breath again. After Zhongli Chu Chu recovered her breath, her hand was still hooked around Su Buling's neck. Perhaps the experience just now was too horrible, so she didn't dare to let go, fearing that if she let go, she would fall into the unforgettable despair and fear of her childhood. She even reached out and pulled Zhongli Juju, holding it tightly. "Master, are you all right?" Su Buling's expression was calm. "It's okay, I was accidentally tricked, just rest for a while." Zhongli Juju looked concerned, leaned in Su Buling's arms, holding Chu Chu's hand. "Chu Chu, what did you see just now? You were so hysterical that you seemed to be scared silly." Zhongli Chu Chu pursed her lips. She didn't want to recall what happened in her childhood. She thought she had forgotten it long ago, but she just experienced it again and realized how desperate it was to be abandoned by the whole world. Compared with the fear in her childhood, the dissatisfaction, entanglement, embarrassment, etc. now are even a very good feeling. At least having this feeling means that she is still alive. Zhongli Chu Chu looked at her master, then at Su Buling beside her, hesitated, and whispered. "Nothing, just, I suddenly realized that you were gone." Su Buling shook his head and held his hands tighter. "Relax, the drug effect should be over soon." "Yeah." Zhongli Chu Chu hooked Su Buling's neck, thought for a while, and leaned her cheek back against Su Buling's chest, while also holding her master's hand in her arms and holding it tightly. Zhongli Juju blinked, and seeing that Chu Chu suddenly stopped being shy, she was naturally delighted, and leaned her head on Su Buling's shoulder, closed her eyes, and smiled. The three of them had pungent drugs smeared under their noses, so they had to breathe out when they spoke, and inhale when they exhaled. In order to suffer less, they didn't speak. Su Buling was holding two beauties, and under the influence of drugs, he was inevitably a little distracted. He pinched the waists of the master and disciple, and after reacting, he quickly took a breath to regain consciousness. Zhongli Chu Chu was awake, and found that Su Buling pinched her, but she did not react at all, and even looked at Su Buling and said lightly, "If you want to touch me, just touch me, it's like this anyway." This sentence can be regarded as a compromise. Su Buling looked at the green eyes in front of him. Although he didn't understand the reason, he knew that Chu Chu no longer cared about the relationship between the three people. He thought for a while and said with a smile, "Don't talk anymore. The longer you hold it in, the less suffering you will suffer." He lowered his head and blocked Chu Chu's mouth. "Well." Zhongli Chu Chu's body was slightly stiff, but she didn't show the shame and anger of the past. She just stared at Su Buling and slowly closed her eyes. Zhongli Jiju leaned on the side and watched her apprentice and her husband hugging each other. At first, she was silly and happy, but after watching for a while, she gradually felt uncomfortable in her heart and felt that she was a little redundant. Zhongli Jiju pursed her lips, feeling sour in her heart. After waiting for a while, she gently squeezed Su Buling with her shoulder, indicating that Su Buling should share the rain and dew equally. The night was quiet and the mountains were silent. The little sparrow stood alone on a branch outside the cliff, acting as a sentry conscientiously. There was a strange noise coming from behind, and the little sparrow turned around and saw that the masters who were accidentally tricked actually had the time to make out. He felt a little disappointed and looked up at the moon in the sky, as if to say, "The birds are so sad. The prince is very fierce." Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 757. The remaining clouds cover the moon, and the dead vines and old trees in the forest are entangled, creating thousands of shadows in the dim light. After Chen Xining left the Liujiang River, she walked for 2 days in the deep mountains and dense forests and arrived near Yulong Ridge. As a princess of South Vietnam, Chen Xining must have more resources than Zhongli Jiju. When she went out, she found a detailed map of Kinzhou from the palace. However, no people have lived in Yulongling for more than 60 years, and there are no landmarks here on the new map. The map in Chen Xining's hand was handed down more than 60 years ago. Most of the reference objects are difficult to identify, so we can only rely on a few peaks to determine the location. At this time, we were still about 10 miles away from Yulong Ridge marked on the map, and we had to climb over 3 mountains. It was already dark, and the dense canopy of trees blocked the light, making it impossible to hurry on. Chen Xining stopped and found a relatively large tree among the mountains. She climbed lightly into the crown of the tree, rested on the branches, and waited for dawn before setting off. The mountains and fields are silent and there is no one around for dozens of miles. If an ordinary girl stayed here, she would definitely be scared to death. But the first thing a martial artist must have is courage. Chen Xining is extremely skilled in martial arts. Meeting Xiong Hu is only a matter of 2 blows, so there is nothing to be afraid of. However, maybe Chen Xining was not careless when he arrived near the Nest of 100 Insects Valley. He specially smeared a circle of medicinal powder on the tree trunk to prevent snakes and scorpions from climbing up. He also wore a curtain on his head to cover his skin tightly to prevent flying insects. Insect bites, the little white snake coiled on the branch, paying attention to the surrounding movements to avoid being attacked when she was not careful. After doing all this, Chen Xining held the silver moon scimitar in her arms, leaned against the tree trunk, closed her eyes, and thought about all the messy things. That auntie's noodles are so delicious, I have to let Aunt Song learn how to do it when she gets back. Ah Ching must miss me and Ah by now. I don't know how to treat Ah Ching, that shameless little thief. That shameless little thief is probably nearby, and he seems to be unable to defeat him if we meet him, or else let a by sneak attack. No, he still has 2 helpers with him, so he can't make a sneak attack. After finding that little thief, what if he has evil thoughts towards me? Random thoughts. Time passed by little by little. There was no sound of wind in the dense forest, and the silence was a bit depressing. You could even hear your own heartbeat clearly. Chen Xining squinted her eyes and was half asleep. She didn't know how long it had been, but she seemed to notice movement out of the corner of her eye. In the blink of an eye, under the bright moonlight, I saw a handsome young man in white clothes, walking slowly from the outside of the dense forest. He was wearing a jade hairpin, long boots, and a charming face like an evildoer, as if he had fallen from the moon palace. The banished immortal is handsome and a bit dreamy. Su Shining. Chen Xining was stunned for a moment, and looked carefully. Behind Su Xinxian, there were 2 maids in gorgeous skirts, one big and one small. Their big and curvy figures were extremely charming. They looked like they were good at giving birth. The little one is very tall and has huge breasts, like two heavy watermelons. The faces of the two women could not be seen clearly, but their clothes were very revealing, barely covering their bodies. Humi Ize, ba. Chen Xining secretly sneered and hid her figure in the tree canopy, wanting to see where Su Shanqian was going. As soon as the three of them walked nearby, the two women stopped. Su Xinxian, who was dressed in white as snow, walked directly to the big tree. She was still dozens of steps away and showed that bright smile. "Your Highness, you are so polite." Chen Xining blinked and saw that she had been discovered, so she jumped down from the tree crowns and put on an angry face. "You liar, give Ah Qing back to me." Su Shanqian walked closer slowly, the smile on his face gradually faded, and he looked down at her, with a somewhat condescending and unruly look in his eyes. "If I don't pay it back, what can Her Majesty Princess do to me?" "You." Chen Xining didn't expect Su Shanqian to be so shameless. Her expression was slightly angry, and she secretly felt a little dangerous, so she stepped back. The people in the Jianghu have made a promise and it's hard to follow up. They agreed to use Ah Qing in exchange for information. How can you go back on your word like this? What can you do to me? The smile on the face of the white-clothed young man in front of her became more and more arrogant. There was a bit of evil in his captivating peach blossom eyes, and he looked at her wantonly, like a white-scaled python that saw the tempting prey on his lips. Chen Xining secretly thought something was wrong. She raised her hand to touch the silver moon scimitar behind her waist, but found that the knife was missing. At this moment, Su Shanqian suddenly came to him and pulled her into his arms. "Ah! You are brave." Chen Xining suddenly panicked, with shock and fear in her eyes. She tried hard to struggle, but found that she was caught by Su Shanqian and could not use any strength at all. Her martial arts skills were too much inferior to her opponent. Soon, Chen Xining's steps became unsteady and she was pressed against the tree trunk behind her. The handsome man in front of her showed a ferocious and excited smile, and tore off her dress. "Ah, you, let me go, don't do this, please." Tears suddenly welled up in Chen Xining's eyes, and she struggled wildly, but had no choice but to look at Su Shining in front of her, letting out her bestiality. It was still in the dead of night, and I didn't know what day it was. The ecstasy fragrance among the three of them had all faded away, and they were tired from kissing and touching each other for half the night. Zhongli Jiju leaned on Su Buling's left-hand side, with the corners of his mouth slightly raised and a slight blush still remaining on his face. Zhongli Chuchu leaned on his right hand, maybe he had just figured out something. Even though the fragrance of ecstasy was gone, he still held Su Buling's arm with a bit of dependence, and his face no longer had the embarrassment and entanglement of the past. Su Buling had just been carrying the incense to keep an eye on the surroundings, and he had to gag her from left to right. She felt really high and mentally exhausted. At this time, she leaned against the stone wall and closed her eyes to fall asleep. However, in a dangerous area, even if he fell asleep, the warrior's vigilance would not fade even a little bit. Su Buling slept for less than an hour. His ears moved slightly, as if he heard some human voices, and then he opened his eyes as sharp as an eagle, and turned to look at the mountains outside the stone cliff. The little sparrow on guard outside seemed to have heard the movement, but did not confirm it. He was standing motionless on the branch and listening carefully. Dong dong. Next to Zhongli Jiju, Ah Qing, who was locked in a small wooden box, was also agitated at this time. He kept hitting the lid inside, making a thumping sound. The slight sound of the wooden box woke up Zhongli Jiju. She opened her eyes and looked at the wooden box next to her in confusion. She noticed that Su Buling was looking outside and said in confusion, "Ms. Sir." "SHH." Su Buling raised his hand to signal to be silent, and then listened carefully. There was no sound of wind in the mountains, and there was almost no sound of birds and animals. In the silent night, there was a faint sound, a bit like a woman's cry. It was very far away, and even Su Buling was not sure whether it was the sound of it or not. I misunderstood. But both Little Sparrow and Ah Ching responded, indicating that there must be movement in the distance. Su Buling saw that Ah Ching was very manic in the wooden box, as if he wanted to break out of the wall. His heart skipped a beat, and he thought something was wrong. Oops, that silly girl is probably chasing me. Hearing the sound, he was in danger. Thinking of this, Su Buling's face darkened slightly, and he stood up with the knife in hand. There is movement outside. Don't act rashly. I'll go over and take a look. Zhongli Jiju also noticed something was wrong with the little green snake and guessed that the master might have come here. If she took someone's pet away for fun and killed her girl in the wilderness, her conscience would never be able to forgive her for the rest of her life. She nodded and said, "Beware of scams and don't be careless." Su Buring nodded, applied the pungent medicine directly under his nose, and then endured the smell that hit Tianling Gai, quickly left the cliff and sprinted towards the source of the sound. The direction from which the sound came was behind a mountain. After Su Buling jumped up the mountain, he could clearly hear the woman's almost sad and angry cry from the dense forest below. "Beast, stop, Weavua. Hold." Su Bulenling was furious. He knew that Chen Xining was as beautiful as a flower. He didn't expect that in these barren mountains and ridges, there would be ruthless gangsters who harmed a weak woman. This was a humming human thing. Su Buring held a straight knife and jumped down from the top of the mountain. He stepped directly on the tree crown and rushed down the mountain at an astonishing speed like a falcon gliding in the night sky. However, being in the territory of 100 Insect Valley, Su Buling's caution has not diminished. In order to prevent it from being a trick to lure the enemy, he stopped when he was 100 steps away from the source of the sound, carefully observed his surroundings, and slowly approached. "Ugh, bastard, stop." After walking dozens of steps in the dense forest, the voice became clearer and clearer, and the grief, anger, and despair in it were not fake at all. Su Buling was angry, speeded up, and swept away the bush that blocked his sight. The tragic scene was at Su Buling, whose face was as frosty as snow, looked up and his eyes suddenly froze. Under the bright moonlight, the third princess of South Vietnam, Chen Xining, dressed in Jianghu costumes, hugged a pitiful big tree and shook it wildly. At the same time, she kicked it with her shoes, causing the autumn leaves to flutter down. There were tears on Chen Xining's beautiful cheeks, as if she had been subjected to some terrible persecution. Her face turned red with grief and anger, and "How much spring is there yet?" Su Buling put away the straight knife and spread his hands slightly, feeling relieved and a little bit unbearable to look at it. Chen Xining is a semi-grandmaster level martial artist, with considerable strength. She kicked the roots of an innocent tree to pieces. The little white snake seemed to be frightened. It lay down about 10 years away and shook its head. It couldn't scream and could only slap the ground with its tail, trying to stop its master from going crazy. The scene was so embarrassing that Su Buring didn't even know what to say. However, I also knew that Chen Xining had been hit, and the panic on his face was not fake. If this continued, he would probably be frightened crazy. Su Buling looked around for a while, and after confirming that there was nothing unusual, he flew to the foot of the big tree. The little white snake was obviously hostile and wanted to attack anyone who was close to its master, but after seeing Su Buling, it stopped. After all, in the eyes of Little White Snake, Su Buling and Chen Xining seemed to have a good relationship. Su Buling came behind Chen Xining, raised his hand and grabbed Chen Xining's shoulders and turned her around. He applied the pungent medicine into Chen Xining's body and slapped her cheeks at the same time. "Hey! Wake up! Wake up!" The pungent smell rushed straight to Tianling Gai. Chen Xining trembled suddenly, and his eyes became clearer. just after seeing the handsome young man in front of me. Ah, bastard! Let me go, I'm going to kill you. Choking. Chen Shining unsheathed the silver moon scimitar behind her waist, and with overwhelming anger and murderous intent, she struck directly at the beast in front of her that had just ravaged her. Depend on. Su Buletinling's eyes were stunned. Are you awake or not? I have good intentions to save you, why do you want to kill me? The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 758. The big tree was covered with fallen leaves. The young woman in military uniform had shame and anger in her eyes. She cut off the fallen leaves with a silver moon scimitar in her hand and slashed the man's neck with a sharp scolding. I kill you. Su Buling knew that Chen Shining had been drugged. He thought that waking her up would restore her consciousness, but she was suddenly swung at her with a knife, and her eyes were obviously a little stunned. Although he was caught off guard, Su Buling did not let down his guard when he came over. When he saw the blade coming, he quickly grabbed Chen Shining's wrist and brought it to his side. He clasped Chen Shining's shoulder with his right hand and shook it hard. Hey! Wake up! Chen Shining's thoughts were sober under the stimulation of pungent drugs. But the appearance of the man in front of her has not changed, and the hallucination and reality are seamlessly connected. Only the clothes are slightly different. How can she distinguish the hallucination and reality when she loses control of her emotions? Chen Shining's eyes were full of fear and anger. After being restrained by Su Buling, she was afraid that Su Buling would pin her down on the tree again, so she moved her hands up and down the tree, kissed and touched her, and struggled and kicked like crazy. Let me go, bastard. Su Buling was confused. Why did he feel like a flower-picking thief who bullied a good girl? So he secretly took Ah Ching out to play for 2 days. So what? Chen Shining was very good at martial arts. At this time, she regained consciousness and was blessed by extreme emotions. Her movements were not ordinary. After struggling twice, she couldn't get away, so she bit Su Buling's hand. Su Buletinling couldn't fight and couldn't. Seeing that Chen Shining had lost her mind and could not regain consciousness, she could only trip Chen Shining with force, clamp her hands behind her, and push her to the ground. Look clearly, it's me. I've been driven crazy. Chen Shining could see clearly that it was because it was Su Buletinling that she was so frightened. After being pushed to the ground, the man's heavy body sat on her lower back, as if he was about to pull up her skirt and break her pussy. Asshole, don't touch me. Chen Shining became increasingly sad and angry. She kicked her shoes randomly on the grass and twisted a few times. When she found that she couldn't get away, she prepared to bite her tongue and commit suicide. Su Buling had been paying attention to Chen Shining's movements. He was startled when he saw this. He quickly lay on her back, grabbed Chen Shining's chin, and said angrily. Are you crazy? Look clearly, it's me, Su Shanshan. Wu dash. Chen Shining's swan-like neck was raised high, and she was forced to look at the perverted thief on the side of her face. She was so suppressed that it was impossible to even move. After struggling several times in vain, she could only let out a whimpering cry. Perhaps because he didn't want to show his despair and powerlessness and let the villain satisfy his desire for conquest, Chen Shining closed his eyes and didn't look into Su Buling's eyes, but tears rolled down from the corners of his eyes uncontrollably. Su Buling grabbed both wrists with his left hand and pinched Chen Shining's chin with his right hand. He couldn't let go. He could only lie on Chen Shining's back and comfort him in a very kind tone. Don't get excited. I'm not here to harm you. You've been given Chinese medicine. Whatever you saw just now was just an illusion. Wu dash. Chen Shining was so excited that her head was in a daze. She would not listen to what Su Buling said. She just wanted to die to keep her innocence. Little White Snake had already noticed that something was wrong with his master, and did not go to deal with Su Buling. He just shook his head beside him, trying to wake up his crazy master. The two of them were locked in a stalemate in the deep mountains and old forests. Time passed little by little, and Chen Shining was crying and struggling. No matter how good his martial arts skills were, he would sometimes get tired. His sobs gradually decreased, and his movements also gradually weakened. Although Su Buling was pressed on his back, he did not move his hands or feet and kept soothing him with a soft tone. Chen Shining was still frightened, but with the long stalemate, thoughts slowly poured into his mind, and he gradually realized that something was wrong. First of all, the initial memory was a bit blurry, as if it was a dream, and the two women were nowhere to be seen. Furthermore, Su Buling, who was dressed in white as snow, was now wearing a common military uniform among Jianghu people, and her torn-off skirt and belly band were now properly worn on her body. Chen Shining realized something was wrong. Her sobs suddenly choked, her expression stiffened slightly, her charming peach blossom eyes opened a slit, and she glanced around in confusion. Su Buling was about to burst out of his mouth. After discovering Chen Shining's reaction, he secretly breathed a sigh of relief, let go of his hand and said helplessly, "Are you awake? What the hell did you see? You want to tear me into pieces? Do you want me to molest you?" After Chen Shining realized what was wrong at first, her thoughts became clearer and clearer, and all kinds of loopholes that were inconsistent with reality came to her mind, making her understand that she seemed to be dreaming just now. Fortunately it was a dream. Otherwise. Chen Shining opened her eyes. She felt relieved at first, but soon her face suddenly turned red, and her eyes were full of disbelief and embarrassment. Wrong. How could I possibly have that dream? She was pinned against a tree by a man, touched and kissed, but the person kissing her was the man behind her. Thinking of the angry and embarrassing scene just now, Chen Shining's face turned red and blood dripped. It was probably the first time in his life that he was so embarrassed. Absolutely impossible, how could I have that kind of dream? It must be the hallucination caused by the Chinese medicine. But how could Chinese medicine cause that kind of hallucination? It stands to reason that it should be like dreaming, thinking about it day by day and dreaming about it at night. Is it possible that there is something aphrodisiac in this medicine? Chen Shining's thoughts went back and forth in an instant, and she lay stiffly on the ground, her eyes widened, and she didn't say anything for a long time. As the saying goes, it's hard for a good man to just wallow. Su Buling suppressed Chen Shining's desperate struggle for a long time, and then he came at full speed again. He must be lying if he said he wasn't tired. Seeing that Chen Shining was no longer fussing, Su Buling stood up and sat on the fallen leaves next to him. He took a water bag from his waist and took a sip, saying slightly annoyed, "Your Highness, please explain clearly, what exactly did you see just now? I heard the noise and came over the mountains to save you. When you saw me, you cut me, bit me, scolded me, and bullied honest people, right? Honest people deserve to be punished. Pointing a knife at me? If you don't give me an explanation today, Qing will belong to me from now on." Chen Shining's long, messy hair was wet and stuck to her cheeks. Her personal military uniform was also dirty, with a few fallen leaves hanging on it. She sat up slowly, still not convinced that she would have that kind of hallucination. But what happened just now is obviously true. Seeing Su Bulenling questioning him, Chen Shining felt a little guilty and her eyes wandered. "Su, Mr. Su, why are you here?" Su Buling spread his hands. "The news you told me, why do you think I am here?" Chen Shining was so confused that she took the little white snake next to her into her hands and did not dare to look at Su Buling. "Where's Qing? What did you do to Qing?" Su Buling's face was stern and he narrowed his eyes slightly. "Don't change the topic and say, why did you kill me just now? The incense of ecstasy will make people hallucinate, but hallucinations will not happen for no reason. If you think about it day by day and dream at night, you will see whatever you think in your mind. Since if you kill me when we meet, you must have murderous intentions towards me. I don't. Chen Xining naturally knew the principles of hallucinogenic drugs, and she was also questioning why she had that kind of illusion. Chen Xining has been learning to handle cases since she was a child, and her mind is still strong. At this time, she calmed down, reviewed the case carefully, and found a somewhat reasonable excuse. Young master is much better at martial arts than me, and he kidnapped Ah Cheng. I came here to find young master, and just now I saw young master, and then he had murderous intentions towards me and wanted to kill me, so. Su Buletinling didn't believe it at all. You were confused just now, but I was sober. When I came over, I saw Her Royal Highness hugging the big tree and rubbing against it. Her eyebrows were bright and she was ashamed and angry. It was not as simple as being chaste. If you don't believe me, ask Little White Snake. Little White Snake watched the whole process and shook his head seriously, looking sure. Su Buling frowned and looked at Chen Xining. Is it possible that just now, I am planning to rape first and then kill? In the heart of Her Royal Highness, I am such a heartless villain. Chen Xining's face turned red with embarrassment, and he wanted to find a hole in the ground to crawl into. He couldn't explain it at all, so he could only say hesitantly. I definitely didn't slander the young master like that in my heart. I lost my mind after being drugged, and I don't know what I was thinking. Moreover, the young master is very skilled in martial arts and broke the promise first. I have resentment and defensiveness in my heart, so, don't blame me, sir. Su Buling actually understood Chen Xining's psychological journey, and he deliberately asked this as a small revenge. He stood up and picked up the straight knife. Ah Ching ran out to follow me on his own. I wanted to return it to you after I went back. Since you have come after me, you should treat me as a renegade. But even if I reneged on my promise, Her Highness the Princess still suspects that I have malicious intentions. I understand. Why would you suspect that I have lust for you? Last time I was in Fuyan Palace, I didn't peek at the princess. If the princess thinks so in her heart, it's really a beautiful thought. Chen Xining knew that she was wrong in judging a gentleman's heart with a villain's heart. She didn't even mention the matter of Ah Ching being kidnapped. She stood up, patted her clothes, thought for a while and said. I met an aunt who ran a shop by the Liujiang River. When I inquired about the news, I heard that the young master brought two beautiful women, so, I made some groundless speculations in my mind. I'm really sorry. Su Buling was not an unreasonable person. After teasing Chen Xining for a few words, he returned to his normal expression, turned around and walked towards the mountain, changing the topic. How's the shop? Chen Xining came to see Su Buling, and checked the Baichong Valley by the way. Now that she found Su Buling, and Su Buling had no ill intentions towards her, she naturally joined the group and followed Su Buling, sorting out her scattered clothes. The shop is very good. Although the smell is a bit unpleasant, the rice noodles made by the aunt are very delicious. I heard that the aunt said that as soon as the young master got there, he dragged two companion girls in and forced them to eat 2 bites. How do you know this kind of delicacy? I've heard of it, and it's my first time to eat it. The snail noodles made by my aunt are not authentic yet. The snails are used to make the soup base, and the meat is cooked until it is tender. Putting it directly into the noodles affects the taste. Chen Xining ate it once on the dock and fell in love with it. She even asked about the recipe and planned to go back to the palace to study it. Hearing Su Buling talk about this, his eyes were slightly surprised. Young master can also cook. Su Buling recalled his cooking skills in making cakes for Aunt Lu and nodded. I can make it, but I'm not sure whether I can eat it. The gentleman is far away from the kitchen. He doesn't know how to cook, so it's nothing. Chen Xining was still troubled by the embarrassing experience just now, and the medicinal power of ecstasy had not completely dissipated. Her mind was not spinning fast. After chatting for a few words, she stopped talking and followed Su Bu behind his back. He climbed over the mountains. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 759. Under the stone cliff, Zhongli Jiju opened the small wooden box, took out Ah Ching and comforted her softly. Don't panic. My husband has gone to help. Birds are watching from the top of the mountain. Nothing will happen to your master. Little green snake may not understand human speech, but he can understand the meaning from Jiju's expression. He was a little quiet at this time, just looking in the direction outside the stone cliff. Zhongli Chuchu sat in front of him, leaning on his master's shoulder, looking a little sleepy. After passing the hurdle in his heart, he resumed his childhood attachment to his master. He also looked outside the cliff, wondering what he was thinking. The two waited for a while, but Su Buling hadn't come back yet. There was a little sparrow following behind to return the letter, so there was nothing to worry about. Zhongli Jiju comforted the little snake for a moment, but then he thought of business, turned his head and said softly. Chu Chu, now that you've thought about it clearly, let's get married when we get back. Qingye is also waiting for us. Su Buling's warship has not been built yet, and the war will not start until spring next year. After Entgui's work, there are still 2. I have enough free time to get married, so I can marry you, King Yi, Manzi, and that stinky Taoist nun Ning Yu He. Zhongli Chuchu raised her head and thought for a while. I am a woman from the world, so there is no need to make such a big show, you just have to make arrangements. Also, you have promised to call me sister from now on. You have come from behind to bully me for so long, and I will not forget it. Call me sister? Not big or small. Zhongli Jiju's expression froze slightly, but Chu Chu finally figured it out, and she didn't dare to offend Chu Chu by talking nonsense. She just pursed her lips and smiled, not knowing whether she agreed or not. Zhongli Chuchu knew her master's temperament and would definitely default on her debts in the future, so she became more serious at the moment. If you don't call me sister, I will call you mother. If you do it in front of Su Buletinling, I don't believe he's not weird. Why is he weird? It's too late to be happy. Send red envelopes. Reading benefits are here. You have up to 888 cash red envelopes to be drawn. Follow the Wixen public account Book Friends Base Camp to draw red envelopes. Hee. The master and apprentice chatted for only a moment when footsteps came from the outside of the stone wall. Zhongli Chuchu turned around and saw that Su Buling was walking up the hillside, followed by Chen Xining in military uniform, who was chattering something. Zhongli Chuchu was about to say hello, but when he took a closer look, he saw that Chen Xining's hair was disheveled and her clothes were in a mess. She looked similar to the way the master looked after being raped by Su Buling. The key was the expression, his eyes flickered, and he was shy as a little girl. Just like when she was in the Black City. Something's wrong. The master and the apprentice squinted their eyes slightly at the same time, subconsciously sitting up a little straighter. They did not stand up to greet him, but looked at Chen Xining, who came over with a scrutinizing look. Chen Xining walked behind Su Buling and came all the way. The emotion of embarrassment about bleeding had dissipated. When she saw the 2 girls under the stone cliff, she was also a little stunned. According to Aunt Lu Jiangpan's description, the 2 women around Su Shanshan were both of extraordinary stature. In her imagination just now, the 2 women also looked scantily clad and posing. At this time, I looked at 2 women sitting together against the wall. They were both wearing clothes from the Miao border area in South Vietnam. They were covered up tightly, and they felt how hot they were. In terms of appearance, one had rather charming fox eyes, and the other she had green eyes from a foreign land, which were pretty and unmistakable, but they were indistinguishable from her peach blossom eyes. The only remarkable thing is that the skin of both of them is fair and delicate, as fragile as a baby. They sit together like sisters. It's hard to tell who is older and who is younger. But that's it. Maybe it was because of the beauty's attraction to each other. Chen Xining didn't know why such an idea came to his mind. He raised his eyes and noticed that the two women were sizing him up and asked, "Mr. Su, are these two your friends?" "It's my woman." Su Buling walked in front with a knife in his hand, and a little sparrow that flew over halfway squatted on his shoulder. He gave a straightforward answer. "Woman." Chen Xining was a little surprised. She had clearly heard from her aunt that the relationship between the two women was that of master and disciple. Chen Xining didn't want to inquire about other people's private matters in detail, so she just glanced at him strangely. Young master has such good taste, he is very philanthropic. Su Buring chuckled lightly. Along the way, he had already gotten to know Chen Xining's talkative nature. He talked a lot when he was nervous, talked a lot when he was embarrassed, and talked even more when he was calm. As long as he started talking, he could keep talking. So I didn't answer the call. When the two came to the vicinity of the stone cliff, the little green snake who was in Jeju's arms hurried over and climbed up along Chen Xining's legs, hanging his head with some grievance and guilt. When Chen Xining saw Ah Ching, she was relieved but also a little annoyed. After all, if she hadn't come out to find Ah Ching, how could such a big embarrassment have happened just now? She held the little green snake in her hands and lectured. "Who told you to run around? You didn't even say hello. Your wings are stiff, right?" The little white snake also popped out of his sleeves and stared at Ah Ching fiercely. Ah Ching couldn't speak either. He turned to look at Zhongli Jeju and opened his mouth again. The little sparrow squatted on Su Buling's shoulder, watching Ah Ching being scolded, and flapped its wings twice in relief, chirping as if to say, "I'll let you compete with me for favor. Bye-bye." As he spoke, Su Buling came to the foot of the stone cliff. Zhongli Chuchu didn't speak, just looked at Chen Xining. Zhongli Jeju's eyes were slightly suspicious. He stood up and walked up to him, looking up and down. "Ms. Sir, what did you do just now? Why is this girl so disheveled?" Su Buling slightly spread his hands. "Who knows, I was poisoned just now, maybe I saw something unclean." Chen Xining looked strange. How dare she talk nonsense on this topic? She walked closer and performed a Jianghu salute. "I am Chen Xining, I was accidentally poisoned just now, thanks to Mr. Su for saving me. Mr. Su and I just met by chance, it's nothing, don't misunderstand me." This explanation was obviously because he was afraid that Su Buling's woman would be misunderstood. Zhongli Jeju was half believing and half doubting. Knowing that Chen Xining was the third princess of Nanyu, it was impossible for her to open her heart at first sight, just smiled and said, "My last name is Zhong and my name is Ju, why did Miss Chen come to the deep mountains and old forests alone?" Chen Xining saw Ah Ching staying in Zhongli Jeju's hands just now, so she naturally knew that her beloved was abducted by this woman. However, after what happened just now, Ah Ching was back in her hands, so it was not easy to mention it again. Just smiled and said, "Well, just come and take a look." Su Buling went to look for Ant Gui, and might have to enter the nest of the 100 Insects Valley. He could only carry 2 people with his hands and didn't want to bring a third burden with him. At this time, he said, "You are not good at martial arts, but you are very brave. This is not a place for the princess. Rest here for one night and go back tomorrow." The purpose of Chen Xining's coming here, in addition to Ah Ching, is to investigate the 100 Insects Valley, the main threat to South Vietnam. With Su Buling as a big leg, and they are like-minded, there is no reason for her to leave. She thought for a moment. I know the exact location of Yulong Ridge, I can lead the way for you. Su Buling waved his hand. You have already walked into the ditch, you lead me. Lead me into the ditch. Chen Si Ning choked on her words. It was really hard to refute, her mind raced, and she picked up the two little snakes in her hand. This mountain range is said to be the burial place of the ancient emperor's tomb. The 100 Insects Valley has been hidden here for decades without being discovered, it must be hidden underground. Your sparrows can't dig holes, but they can, and they can find it much faster. Zhongli Jiju was a little tempted when she heard this. No matter what she thought in her heart, finding Ant Gui was the top priority. The little sparrows could only scout at high altitudes. If there were any ground buildings, they would have been discovered long ago. Until now, there is still no direction, it must be hidden underground, and it is obviously more appropriate to let the snakes search. Su Buling had the same idea as Jiju, and nodded. That's fine, but I can't protect the princess' safety. If something happens, you'll have to pray for your own safety. Chen Si Ning smiled, as long as I can help the people of South Vietnam get rid of the great threat, it doesn't matter if I die. You just need to pay attention to yourself and the two girls, and don't worry about me. He put the two little snakes on the ground, took out two small balls, and arranged the work. But Ah Ching looked at the black little balls and obviously didn't want to eat them. He turned to look at Jiju. The little white snake was also curious about what seduced Ah Ching away, and at this time, it also looked over in the direction of Ah Ching's gaze. Zhongli Jiju looked a little proud. In front of the master, he took out two small pills and put them in front of the two little snakes, and mocked. What a great white dragon king, but it's a pity that snakes are not raised like this. Chen Si Ning was naturally a little embarrassed that her pet was disobedient and ran to eat the food given by others, but she had nothing to say and was about to take the small ball back. The little sparrow standing on Su Buling's shoulder had already been jealous. Seeing this, he jumped directly into Chen Si Ning's hand and ate the small ball. He also rubbed his head against Chen Si Ning's neck in a particularly intimate manner, as if he had met her too late. Chen Si Ning was secretly delighted, and quickly raised her hand to touch the little sparrow's head. What a Yunfa mountain spirit, so obedient. Zhongli Jiju was obviously a little annoyed by Yi's sabotage, and stood up with her hands on her waist. Come back, your wings are hard, right? Chirp. Are you coming back? Chirp. The man and the bird quarreled, and the scene was really funny. Su Buling shook his head, raised his hand and pulled Jiju back to the cliff. Rest first, the 100 Insects Valley is nearby, and a fight may break out at any time, so you have to keep your strength. Zhongli Jiju saw that the little sparrow was angry with her, and there was nothing she could do. She sat down in front of Chuchu and ignored Chen Si Ning. Chen Si Ning smiled in her eyes and sat under the stone wall a little further away. After glancing at the three people next to her, she closed her eyes and began to rest. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 760. At the foot of Yulong Ridge, inside the huge underground palace, Sikongji stood in a house. On the desk was a corpse that had died of poisoning. While he was inspecting it carefully, the third elder Gu Ling came to the door and said, "Second brother, the bird that was released just now came back to report that there is movement 10 miles northwest. Should you send someone over to take a look, or?" Although 100 Insect Valley is hidden in the deep mountains and old forests, no matter how deep it is hidden and how many traps are placed, there are still a few medicine farmers and hunters who are not afraid of death walking nearby every year. It is impossible for Baikong Valley to have one post and one sentry every 10 steps within a radius of dozens of miles. Birds and beasts are kept to guard the area, but the birds and beasts have different languages and can report someone who has broken in, but they cannot identify who is coming. Sikongji put down the dissection knife, wiped his hands, thought about it for a moment, and said in a hoarse voice. Su Buling's martial arts skills are too high. If it's him who comes here and goes to check it out rashly, he will definitely catch him and ask about the details of Yulong Ridge. Just wait here and wait. Gu Ling naturally knew this truth and ran over to let Sikongji, who had come and gone without a trace, go over and take a look. However, Sikongji did not dare to walk out of the bunker rashly, so he could only nod. Sikongji picked up the cane, walked out of the room, and thought for a moment. Su Buletinling found Yulong Ridge in just a few days. Someone must have led the way. With Su Buletinling's ability, it probably won't take more than a few days to find the underground palace. Have the defenses been laid out? Gu Ling nodded and pointed to the center of the underground palace. Preparations have been made. Poison arrows, poisonous smoke, and trip ropes have been arranged in the tomb passage. There are also 2 crossbows placed outside. If Su Buling dares to come in, he will definitely be pierced by thousands of arrows. When Sikongji heard this, he shook his head slightly. As long as we are alive, we will really kill them. A corpse cannot command the Daewoo Court, and can only bring disaster to South Vietnam. Just remove the bed crossbow and put it away. Gu Ling was slightly embarrassed. He naturally knew that Su Buling could not be beaten to death, but Su Buling was a military leader in the Central Plains and was almost recognized as the best in the world. Since the founding of the sect, Baichong Valley has not been outstanding in terms of personal combat power. Although he is good at trapping poison and refining goo, these are all hidden tricks. In a duel with real swords and guns, he may not be as good as the one in the world. Second-rate sect. In the entire 100 Insect Valley, Zhou Qin was probably the only one who could arm wrestle with Su Buling. If Su Buling was defeated without poison, who among the hundreds of people in the underground palace could capture Su Buling? Gu Ling hesitated for a moment. Su Buling is definitely an ordinary man, and his life will definitely be tough. It is better to follow the arrangement of killing him directly, rather than holding on and not catching him. Sikongji was actually having a headache with this problem as well. He was afraid of being beaten to death if he struck hard, but he might not be able to restrain himself if he struck lightly. After thinking about it, he could only wave his hand. Prepare the doorstone and open the 10,000 snake cave. Once Su Buletinling comes in, seal the exit, close the door and beat the dog. Thousands of poisons and more than 300 disciples, he only needs to succeed once and he will fall down. Gu Ling frowned when he heard that he was going to spend a lot of money. To kill a military leader by force, 700 to 800 people in a fully armored army will die. The disciples in the underground palace have been carefully trained since childhood. Even if they are poisoned, the loss will probably be unbearable. Sikongji shook his head. Those who achieve great things don't stick to trivial matters. As long as we can catch Su Buling, it doesn't matter if disciple number 100 dies. We can look for disciples slowly, and Su Buling is the only one. Seeing this, Gu Ling didn't know much to say. He sighed softly and went down to arrange for his disciples to prepare. On the side of the underground palace, in the huge pit renovated from the tomb, thousands of venomous snakes were densely entangled in it, walking among the mountains of bones. The scene was eerie and terrifying, like the 9 Netherworld. Directly above the snake cave, several wooden cages were suspended in the air. Inside were some coolies who were used to do heavy work. After working without seeing the light of day for a long time, their spirits were obviously on the verge of collapse, but no one dared to do anything weak. Appearance, because once you can no longer do the work, you will be immediately pulled to the house at the back. When you come back, there will probably be a corpse thrown into the snake cave below, and those who have not come back will become nothing. One dares to think. In the innermost wooden cage, 5 prisoners of various ages sat in it, all wearing meow clothing. The 3 men's eyes were dull, and they had been tortured out of their minds. An old woman who is over 70 years old is sitting in the corner of a wooden cage. She has been the head of the village for many years. When she was young, she was in the era of wars and cannibalism in the Three Kingdoms. She has seen everything and has no feelings about the current horrific situation. But Aunt Gui is too old after all. She has been locked up in the dark and cold underground palace for so long, and her body cannot bear it, and she is already a candle in the wind. Reading benefits send you a cash red envelope. Follow VX Public Book Friends Base Camp to get it. 13-year-old Ahu, as his name suggests, has a tiger head and a tiger brain. Although he was frightened at first, with his grandma in front of him, he didn't have the same feelings about life and death as an adult, and he gradually adapted to the current situation. Environment. At this time, Ahu was sitting next to Aunt Gui, helping to rub her shoulders and said with a smile, "Grandma, the Chinese New Year is coming soon." Kingzi and Xian said that they would go to the county town together for a stroll during the New Year's Eve and then buy a hairpin for Grandma. It's not that Ahu is ignorant when he says this. In this desperate environment, he can no longer feel sorry for himself. He just says some nice words to make his grandma happy. He knows that he may never see the sun again in his life, and it is very likely that grandma will not be able to make it through this year. Aunt Gui's snow-white hair was neatly tidied, and there was no color on her wrinkled face, but she still had a smile on her face. However, Aunt Gui was far more worried than the 13-year-old Ahu. She was not worried about her own death, but about the village. Aunt Gui was born during the Three Kingdoms period, when the 100 Insects Valley was still in its heyday and had not been wiped out. She knew much more about how vicious and despicable the 100 Insects Valley was than people of this era. Like the 10,000 Snake Cave below, it was just an imitation of the 100 Insects Valley back then. It was almost common knowledge that the 100 Insects Valley used living people to test drugs. It was impossible to count how many people disappeared in South Vietnam every year. Although the 18 villages of Phi Shuling had a total of tens of thousands of people, they were not even considered a force in South Vietnam. They were just a few villages united together, and they were not in the eyes of the 100 Insects Valley. Aunt Gui knew that the 100 Insects Valley must have other intentions in capturing them, and it was actually easy to guess what they were after. Aunt Gui has been with Zhongli Jiju for several years, and she has a good relationship with Chuchu. Now Chuchu has become one of the 8 Great Ones and is well known all over the world. She is also related to the son of the Prince of Daewoo. Baekong Valley must use her as bait to attract Jeju and others to come back. Aunt Gui hopes that Jeju and others will come back soon, because Baekong Valley will definitely make things bigger if it fails to achieve its goal. If it cannot capture people to force Jeju back, the next step is to slaughter the village and Phi Shuling until Jeju is forced back. But Aunt Gui is also afraid that Jeju will really come back, because coming back is to die. Baekong Valley is too big, and the Prince of the Central Plains cannot control it. As long as you set foot in Nanyu, you will become fish in the mouth of Baekong Valley. The village may be saved, but Jeju and others will end up in a more terrible end than death. On one side are the lives of the old and young in the 18 villages, and on the other side are Jeju master and apprentice who are regarded as their own children. 2 lives and thousands of lives, it seems easy to choose, but Aunt Gui is obviously not qualified to choose, and no one wants to make such a choice. This is just like the head sheep, thinking about whether to let the wolf pack eat the cubs first or the adult sheep first. Will the wolf pack listen if it chooses? It can only be left to fate. After being locked in the wooden cage for several months, the result of waiting seems to be coming out soon. Aunt Gui saw that the people in the 100 Insects Valley were busy, setting up various poisons and traps everywhere, and she knew that Jeju was back and found this place. Aunt Gui felt a little relieved that Jeju did not forget the old kindness and could run back thousands of miles for her old bones. But she felt more sad and worried, because this was a trap, and people who came in could not get out alive. She should actually let the 5 people die here together, notify Jeju to leave, and leave them alone, so that Jeju can survive, and the 100 insects valley will attract prey and will not attack the village again. But just like a lamb in a cage, she had no way to notify her relatives to come and rescue her. She could only watch the huge trap taking shape little by little under her eyes with worry and helplessness. I really couldn't write fast these days. I sat in front of the computer for 10 hours, and spent 8 hours thinking about how to write. I can only be safe and update twice. I will try to speed up. Brothers and sisters, please understand Orts. Pi recommends a book written by a history master, the good prince of the Tang dynasty. Introduction, Li Chengqian, the good prince of the Tang dynasty. Who is in favor and who is against?